Hey there everyone, welcome to Succinct Psychology. My name is Jaia Hendrickson, and today I'm going to be starting out Chapter 1 of the Principles of Social Psychology. This is going to be a 13-chapter course in which I'll be going over a variety of topics within social psychology. So I hope you enjoy this first video and you decide to stick around for more. And I'd like to add that these slides have been adopted from the University of Minnesota Libraries and changes have been made. Alright, so I'm just going to discuss the organization and the structure of how these videos are going to correspond with the chapters of the course. So we're going to start out with Chapter 1, which is going to be introducing social psychology. So we'll be doing some introductory concepts, as well as a bit of the research methods that are involved in social psychology. Then we're going to transition into Chapter 2, which is going to be social learning and social cognition. Then we'll transition to Chapter 3, which is going to focus on social affect. And then the remainder of the chapters are going to be laid out in a 3-level analysis, starting from the individual level. That will include chapters such as the self in Chapter 4 and perceiving others in Chapter 6, at which point we'll transition to the social interaction level, which will include chapters such as influencing and conforming in Chapter 7, as well as aggression in Chapter 10. And finally, we'll finish off in the group and cultural level, which will include chapters such as working groups, performance and decision-making in Chapter 11, and competition and cooperation in the social world in Chapter 13. Alright, so this first set of videos in Chapter 1 are going to be involved with defining social psychology. So we're going to discuss a little bit of the history of social psychology as well as some principles. And then we'll be discussing affect, behavior, and cognition in a bit more detail. And then we'll also be discussing a bit of conducting research in social psychology. Alright, so let's start at a baseline definition of what social psychology is. So the book definition we have here is: social psychology is a scientific study of how we feel about, think about, and behave toward the people around us and how our feelings, thoughts, and behaviors are influenced by those people. So social psychology is an extremely broad field in that it has its fingers in a lot of different areas. So things such as group interactions, conformity, attitudes, aggression, discrimination, those all fall within the realm of social psychology. Chances are, if it has to do with people interacting, social psychologists study it. Alright, so for a little bit of history of social psychology. So during the 40s and 50s, two social psychologists, Kurt Lewin and Leon Festinger, they refined the experimental approach to studying behavior. And in that, they created social psychology as a scientific discipline. Lewin, who's pictured here on the bottom right hand of this screen, is often referred to as the father of social psychology because many of the initial ideas were developed by him in that discipline, as well as the main idea to focus on studying dynamic relationships between individuals. During the 50s and the 60s, the social psychology saw a transition towards attitudes and group processes. And then during the 70s and the 80s, there was a transition to a more cognitive orientation. And today, social psychology continues to expand into a number of different areas, including areas such as evolutionary psychology, attitudes and persuasion, the study of culture, and social neuroscience. All right, so as I mentioned, social psychology is the study of dynamic relationships between individuals and the people around them. And every person's different. Everyone has their own individual characteristics, their own motivations, their own emotions, their own personality traits. And these are all very important for determining social behavior. But beyond individual differences, our behavior is largely determined by the social situation. And the social situation describes essentially the people that we interact with in everyday life. So this includes our friends, our family, our fraternity brothers, our sorority sisters, our religious groups, the people we see on TV, the people we read about on the internet, and even people we think about or imagine. So this social psychology is largely the study of the social situation. And our social situations create social influence. And social influence is the process through which other people change our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and the ways in which we change theirs. One of the biggest motivations within people relates to the self. And that's the motivation to protect and enhance oneself as much as possible, as well as the people that are psychologically close to us. And another major motivation within people relates to the social situation. And that motivation is to affiliate, accept, and to be accepted by others. We'll refer to these two motivations as self-concern and other concern. Now, there are times when these two motivations coincide. So, say, for example, falling in love. When people fall in love, they are concerned with connecting with somebody, but it's also about self-concern. When people fall in love, they feel good about themselves. Or say when people volunteer their help for someone who's in need of help. Yes, it is about benefiting the other person, but it's also about us. We feel good when we help other people. And of course, there are situations where these two motivations might conflict. All right, before we go forward, I want to emphasize an important principle of social psychology, and that's one that's going to stick with us throughout the remainder of this course. And that's that although individual differences are important and they do matter, the social situation is often a greater determinant of our behavior than is individual characteristics such as personality. So to put that into perspective, when social psychologists examine or analyze a situation such as a cult suicide, they tend to focus on the characteristics of the situation. So strong leadership, pressure from other group cult members to engage in certain behaviors. They tend to focus on that rather than the characteristics of the individual group members. And to further elaborate on that, we can think about people. We'll see that people, ordinary people, who aren't inherently bad or evil, can be prompted to engage in evil and bad behaviors if it's due to an authority figure or pressure from other people. And so one example might be having someone apply lethal levels of shock to a person. And if you caught that reference, that's a reference to the Milgram experiment. If you don't know what that is, we'll be discussing it in more detail later on. All right, here's a quick critical thinking exercise I want you guys to do. So consider a recent situation from your personal experience in which you took into consideration the person and the situation as causes of behavior. Do you think you might have underestimated the power of the social situation? So just think about that. Think about a situation where you considered a person and the causes of that behavior. Do you think you might have underestimated the power of the social situation? Chances are you did. And so on top of discovering how strongly the social situation impacts our behavior, social psychologists have also discovered that we often don't recognize just how strong the social situation is in determining our behavior. In fact, we often wrongly and erroneously assume that our behavior and the behavior of the people around us is of our own accord, absent of any external influences. And that's not the case. All right, so one result of social influence is the development of social norms. And social norms are ways of thinking, behaving, feeling, shared by group members and are generally perceived as appropriate by those group members. And norms can include things such as customs, traditions, standards, and general values of a group. The social norms that guide our everyday behavior and create the social influence are largely derived in part from our culture. And culture is a group of people usually living within the same geographical region who share a common set of social norms. That includes religious and family values as well as moral beliefs. So norms in Western cultures are primarily oriented towards individualism. And that's that they tend to focus on they focus on self-enhancement and individualism and independence. So children in Western cultures will be taught to develop and value a sense of personal sense and see themselves as largely separate from other people. Children in Western cultures feel special about themselves. They enjoy receiving gold stars in their projects and getting good grades in their class. And adults in Western societies are generally occupied with promoting their own individual success. And that's often in comparison to or at the expense of others. Now, in contrast, norms in East Asian cultures are much more oriented towards other concern. And these norms indicate that people should be fundamentally connected to others and thus more interdependent. So and we can refer to this formally as collectivism. And children in East Asian cultures are taught to focus on developing harmonious social relationships with others, as well as group togetherness, connectedness, and duty and responsibility to the family. When members of an East Asian culture are asked to describe themselves, they often indicate that they're particularly concerned about others, including their colleagues and their close friends. All right, everyone. Before we get into too much detail about affect and behavior, I'm going to end the video here before we run on too long. But I hope you enjoyed this first video and you decide to stick around for more. All right, see you.